You see the listing at 2 in the morning. Center cockpit, teak trim, a price that feels almost too kind. You start doing the math on your savings, you picture the trade winds, stop right there. Because I have written that exact check, and I lost my shirt doing it. 20 years and 5 boats later, there are 5 specific cruising sailboats I would not take across an ocean if you handed me the keys for free. Not because they are ugly, because they will quietly drain your account and put your life at risk offshore, and the listing will never say a word about it. I learned this the hard way. My first real cruising boat was a 1988 production sloop I bought for $61,000, and I sold it 4 years later, having poured another $40,000 into it, still bleeding. So stay with me, because near the end I am going to give you one 2-minute dock test straight out of a marine surveyor's report that tells you whether a hull is hiding the single most expensive failure in cruising. First boat or third boat, this is the test that saves the 6-figure mistake. Let me take you through the 5, one at a time. And I am starting with the boat that fooled me first, because it fooled the most people. The Hunter Legend. Specifically, the late 1980s and early 1990s Hunters, the 37, the 40, the boats with that clean, modern rig and the huge, bright interior that makes every other boat at the dock feel like a cave. I walked onto one and I fell in love with the light, big windows, headroom for days, an aft cabin you could actually sleep 2 adults in without a shoehorn, and the price was thousands below the heavy full-keel boats next to it. I thought I had found a loophole in the market. Here is what I did not understand. That rig is called a B&R rig, named for 2 Swedish engineers, Lars Bergstrom and Sven Ritter, who designed it in the 1980s. It uses swept back spreaders and a big rigid vang instead of a backstay. On paper it is clever, it lets the mainsail have a huge roach, and it simplifies the deck, but look at what it costs you offshore. With no backstay and those heavily swept spreaders, you cannot ease the mainsail out past the shrouds without the sail pressing hard against the rigging. On a long downwind ocean passage, which is exactly what you bought a cruising boat to do, the main chafes against the spreader tips hour after hour after hour. I watched a friend wear a hole clean through his mainsail on a passage from the Chesapeake to the islands. 3 days of steady trade wind and the sail was ruined. A new offshore grade mainsail for that boat ran him around $4,000. But that was the cheap part. The bigger problem is the build itself. These boats were built to a price for coastal sailing, and Hunter never really hid that, but the brokers reselling them sure do. The hull-to-deck joint, the bulkheads, the deck coring around the fittings. I pulled a winch base on one, and the balsa core underneath came out like wet breakfast cereal. That is water that traveled through a fastening that was never properly sealed, sitting in the core for years, spreading in every direction you cannot see. So, the Hunter teaches you the first hard rule. A bright, roomy, cheap boat is bright, roomy, and cheap for a reason, and the reason lives in the parts you cannot see from the dock. That is painful, but it is nothing compared to the boat I am about to show you, because at least the Hunter can sail. The next one can barely be called a Bluewater boat at all, and thousands of people have been talked into taking it offshore anyway. The McGregor 26. Now you might be thinking, Marcus, nobody serious is crossing an ocean on a McGregor, and you would be surprised. I have met the people. They read a forum post from one guy who did it once, and they convinced themselves it was fine. So let me tell you exactly why I would never trust my life to one. Roger McGregor built these boats in California, and he built a lot of them. The 26 was one of the best-selling sailboats in the world, and I understand why. It is light, it is cheap, you can tow it behind a truck, and the later models had a water ballast system and a big outboard so you could motor at speeds a real sailboat only dreams about. As a lake boat, as a weekend toy, it is honestly brilliant. Roger knew his market, and he served it well. But look at what water ballast actually means offshore. Instead of a heavy lead keel bolted low under the boat, you have a tank you fill with seawater to hold the boat down. When that tank is full, you might have around 1,100 to 1,200 pounds of water holding you upright. That sounds like a lot until you understand the physics. Water ballast sits high and it has almost no righting power once the boat rolls past a certain angle. A proper Bluewater boat is designed so that if a wave knocks it flat, even rolls it completely over, it will come back up on its own. The number surveyors and naval architects use for this is the angle of vanishing stability. On a serious ocean boat, you want that number up around 120, 130 degrees. On a water-ballasted trailer sailor, it can be dramatically lower. What that means in plain English is this: a wave that a real cruising boat shrugs off is a wave that can put the McGregor upside down and keep it there. I would never bet my family on that math. Not for a coastal hop in settled weather, and absolutely not for a passage. And here is the confession part. Early in my search, before I knew any of this, I very nearly bought a big trailerable boat because the low price let me skip years of saving. I told myself I would just be careful with the weather. That is the most dangerous sentence in all of cruising. The ocean does not care about your plan. The whole point of a proper hull is that it protects you when the weather beats your plan, because eventually it will. So the McGregor teaches the second rule. Price and portability are not the same as safety, and the number that actually matters, the angle of vanishing stability, never shows up in the listing. You have to go dig for it, but knowing the number is not enough, because the next boat I want to warn you about has good stability numbers, a beloved name, and still hit a bill that made me physically sick when I opened it, the Catalina 36. And I want to be careful here, because Catalina owners are loyal and the company earned that loyalty. Frank Butler built Catalina yachts into one of the great American production builders, and the 36, which came out in the early 1980s, sold in huge numbers because it delivered enormous value. Roomy, easy to sail, parts everywhere, a used one is cheap and cheerful. For coastal cruising, for the Chesapeake, for the Great Lakes, for weekending and coastal hops, it is a lot of boat for the money, and I will not pretend otherwise. The trap is when people take a coastal boat and try to make it a Bluewater boat because the price to buy is so low it feels like free money. That is exactly the mistake I made, just with a different brand, and let me tell you what it actually cost. Start with blisters. Boats from that era, built through the 1980s and into the early 90s, were laid up with polyester resin over a hull that was never designed to sit in warm salt water for decades. Water molecules migrate through the gel coat and form osmotic blisters in the laminate. On a survey, you will see them described almost casually, a few small blisters below the waterline, nothing structural. But when you decide to actually fix it right, you peel the gel coat off the entire bottom, dry the hull out for months, and relaminate. I have watched that bill land between $12,000 and $25,000, depending on the yard and the region. On a boat you paid $40,000 for. Think about that ratio. Then there is the rudder. On a lot of these production boats, the rudder is a fiberglass skin over foam around a stainless steel frame. Water gets in through the smallest crack, sits against the stainless with no oxygen, and you get crevice corrosion eating the frame from the inside while the outside looks perfect. You do not know until the rudder fails, and it tends to fail exactly when you are loading it hardest, which offshore means in a following sea and heavy wind, the worst possible moment. A new rudder built properly is several $1,000s, and that is if the boat is even still supported. Now here is the part I promise for those of you who already own a boat and are sitting there thinking, this video is only for shoppers. Stay with me, because this next bit is specifically for you, and you can check it this weekend without a broker and without hauling out. Go down below on the boat you already own and find where the chain plates, the metal straps that hold your rigging to the hull, pass through the deck or attached to a bulkhead. Look for rust streaks, a brown stain weeping down from the fitting, or any softness in the wood around it. Then take a flashlight and press your thumb hard along the base of the main bulkhead where it meets the hull. If it feels spongy, if the wood is dark and damp, if the fiberglass tabbing that bonds that bulkhead to the hull is cracked or lifting, you have found a problem that is silently getting worse, and it will surface as a rigging failure. You do not need a haul out for this. You need a flashlight in 20 minutes. And here is the thing. That flashlight check is one small piece of a much bigger map. And after 20 years and 5 boats, I finally put the whole map in one place. It is called the Complete Sail Smart System, and it is the honest framework I wish someone had handed me before I wrote my first check. All 3 volumes walk you from your very first question to your final decision, laid out on real cost numbers, not dealer optimism, and not forum folklore. It shows you the true cost architecture of owning one of these boats, the 6 Bluewater ready hulls worth your time and exactly what they share, and the asset decision framework. One clear model you can point at boats, at energy, at any big purchase in your life. And you can test how honest it is tonight for free. Before you spend a thing, take that spongy bulkhead check I just gave you, go put your own thumb on your own boat and see if the structure tells you the truth the listing never did. That is the whole spirit of the collection, proven on your own hull. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. This costs you nothing to try, and the next boat you go see is already out there waiting. So knowing this first is simply the difference between walking aboard blind and walking aboard armed. Because a rigger will confirm exactly what your own hand just found, and that is where this next part goes. A rigger will charge you a couple $100 to inspect it properly, and that couple $100 can save your mast and possibly your life. That single check is the reason some of you should pause this video, go to the boat, and come back. I mean it. So the Catalina teaches the third rule. The purchase price is the down payment on a much bigger number, and a cheap coastal boat pushed offshore turns every one of its cost-saving shortcuts into a bill with your name on it. That is hard to hear. But the next boat I want to warn you about is worse, because it hides its worst problem in the one place you are least able to inspect. And I have seen it end a cruising dream in a single afternoon. The modern lightweight production cruiser, I am talking about a broad category here, the Bavarias, and boats built in that same fast, efficient, European production style through the 1990s and 2000s. Bavaria Yachtbau in Giebelstadt, Germany, built these boats on an assembly line with real precision, and a lot of the designs came from the respected naval architecture office of J&J. They are handsome, they sail well in a breeze, and on the used market they are astonishingly cheap for the size. You can get a lot of feet for your dollar. That is the bait, and I bid on a boat just like this early on. Here is what you cannot see. To build fast and cheap, these boats use a molded fiberglass inner liner, sometimes called a grid or a pan, that drops into the hull and gets bonded in to take the loads from the keel and the rigging. Your keel is bolted up into that structure. Your floors, the transverse structural members, are part of that molded grid rather than hand-laid to the hull. When it is bonded well and the boat is led an easy life, it is fine. When that bond starts to let go, or when the boat touches bottom hard, you get problems that are very expensive and very hard to see. The keel is the nightmare. On a lot of these boats, the ballast keel is a cast iron fin bolted to the bottom of the hull with a row of keel bolts, iron rust. The bolts and the keel stub live in bilge water. Over the years, you get corrosion at the joint, and you get what surveyors call the keel smile, a hairline crack that opens along the top of the keel where it meets the hull, weeping rust. Sometimes it is cosmetic, sometimes it means the keel has been working loose and the structure around the bolts is failing. I have seen a survey where the keel bolts, when they finally dropped the keel, had corroded down to a fraction of their original diameter. Dropping a keel, cleaning the joint, replacing the bolts, and rebedding the whole thing can run you $15,000 to $30,000, and if the grid itself is damaged, you are into money that exceeds what the boat is worth. And I want to name the thing the listing does. The seller drops the boat in the water so you cannot see the keel joint. The photos are all sunset shots of the cockpit and the galley. The word Bluewater appears in the description because the model once crossed an ocean in a magazine article. None of that tells you the condition of the one joint that keeps the heaviest part of your boat attached to the rest of it. Somebody is counting on you not knowing to look. So the lightweight production boat teaches the fourth rule. The cheapest way to build a boat fast is to hide the structure inside a molded liner, and what is hidden is exactly what fails, and exactly what you cannot inspect from the dock. That should make you angry, because it is designed to keep you in the dark. But before I show you the 2-minute test that cuts through all of it, I have one more boat, and this one surprises people because it is supposed to be the safe choice. The heavy full keel classic, the Morgantown Island 41, is the poster child, and I say this with real affection, because Charlie Morgan drew some beautiful boats and built a real business in Florida in the late 1960s and 1970s. The Out Island became one of the most successful charter boats ever built. Thick fiberglass, a full keel, a center cockpit, a shoal draft so you can sneak into the islands. It looks like the platonic ideal of a safe, salty, go-anywhere cruiser, and that reputation is exactly why I want you to slow down. Here is the confession. For years, I believed heavier was automatically safer and older was automatically better built. There is a cult of the full keel classic, and I was a paid-up member. Then I actually sailed a few of them offshore, and I learned what that reputation leaves out. These boats do not go to windward. When the weather turns and you need to claw off a lee shore, that shoal full keel and that heavy displacement mean the boat makes enormous leeway and points terribly. A boat that cannot sail off a dangerous shore in a blow is not the safe choice you thought it was. It is a different kind of danger. And the systems on a 1970s boat, if they have not all been replaced, are a rolling list of failures waiting to happen. Original fuel tanks made of steel that has been rusting from the inside for 50 years. Chain plates buried in the structure where you cannot see them corroding. Deck coring that has been soaking through 1,000 old fastenings since before you owned a car. I looked hard at one of these. The romance was overwhelming. Then I added up the real refit. New standing rigging, because if you cannot document its age, you must replace it. $5,000 to $10,000. New fuel tank fabricated and installed, several thousand more. Rebedding every deck, fitting and repairing wet core, tens of thousands if it is widespread. Repower if the old diesel is tired, $15,000 to $25,000 for the engine alone before installation. Suddenly, the $29,000 Salty Classic is a $100,000 project, and you are doing it on a boat that still will not sail to windward when your life depends on it. So, the Heavy Classic teaches the fifth rule, and it is the one that ties them all together. There is no category of boat that is automatically safe, not the light one, not the heavy one, not the cheap one, not the famous one. Safety is not in the reputation. Safety is in the specific condition of the specific hull in front of you, and almost every seller, every broker, every glossy listing is built to keep you looking at the reputation instead of the condition. Which brings me to the thing I promised you at the start, because after 20 years, after 5 boats, after tens of thousands of dollars in lessons, I found that the single most expensive failure in cruising, the failure of the hull structure and the keel joint, can be sniffed out in about 2 minutes standing on the boat before you ever spend $1 on a survey. And I did not invent this. I learned it reading marine surveyors' own reports and standards, the documents brokers hope you never read. Here is the test. When you step aboard any used cruising boat you are serious about, go straight below and do 3 things before you look at a single cushion or countertop. First, get down on the cabin sole and press hard along the base of the mast and along the floors under the cabin sole, especially near the keel. On a boat with a bolted keel and a molded liner, this is where the structure lives. Push with real weight. If anything flexes, if you hear a creak or a dull crackle, if the sole moves under your hand, that liner bond or that grit is working and you walk away. Second, find the deepest part of the bilge and look at the keel bolts and the keel stub. You want clean metal or paint, not a mound of rust and not standing brown water. Run your finger along the joint where the top of the keel meets the hull inside the boat. Then, if you can get the boat hauled or catch it on the hard, look at that same joint on the outside. A fine weeping brown line along the top of the keel smile tells you the keel has been moving. One tap along that joint with a plastic mallet, listening for a dull, dead sound instead of a sharp, hard ring, tells you where the laminate has gone soft or the bond has failed. Third, take a cheap phenolic hammer or even your knuckle and sound the hull along the turn of the bilge and around the chain plates and along the hull to deck joint. A healthy, solid laminate rings back at you, bright and hard. Wet core and delamination answer with a flat, dull thud, like knocking on a wet cardboard box. Move along the hull in a grid, a foot at a time, and listen for the note to change. When the note goes dead, you have found water in the structure, and you have found it for free in 2 minutes with your own hand. Here is why this is the secret nobody hands you. Every one of the 5 boats I just described fails one of these 3 checks. And every one of those failures is the expensive one, the structural one, The one that turns a $40,000 boat into a $100,000 hull. The blistered gel coat is cosmetic by comparison. The worn sail is pocket change. It is the hull structure and the keel joint that end dreams, and the surveyors who write the reports have been telling us how to find it in plain language for decades. The sellers just never quote that part. The knowledge existed the whole time. It was buried under sunset photos and the word Bluewater. Now it is yours, and you can use it this week on the very next boat you go see. Let me put a finer point on it, because I want you to actually do this and not just nod. You do not need to be a surveyor to hear the difference between a hard ring and a dead thud. Your ear knows it instantly the first time you hear both back to back. Go to any boatyard, find a solid hull and a tired one, and tap them both. Once you have heard the dead note, you will never unhear it, and no listing will ever fool you again. That single skill is worth more than every buying guide on the internet, and it costs you nothing but the willingness to knock on a boat and listen. And think about what this does to the whole game. The broker wants you emotional. He wants you picturing the trade winds and the teak and the sundowners in the cockpit. He drops the boat in the water so you cannot see the keel. He fills the listing with the reputation and none of the condition. But you walk aboard, you get down on your knees in the bilge, you press the structure, you sound the hull, and in 2 minutes, you know more true things about that boat than the entire listing told you. You have taken the one weapon he was counting on, your ignorance, and you have thrown it overboard. That is the whole thing. That is 20 years and 5 boats and more money than I want to admit compressed into a test you can run on a Saturday. So let me leave you with the truth. I wish someone had grabbed me by the collar and told me before I wrote my first check. The boat that bankrupts you almost never looks like the problem from the dock. It looks like the deal. It looks like the bright cabin, the low price, the famous name, the salty full keel. The mistake is not buying a bad boat. The mistake is trusting the reputation instead of putting your own hand on the structure. You do not have to make my mistakes. You get to skip straight to the part where you already know. You are the kind of buyer who does the homework before the money moves. That is why you are still here at the end of a long video instead of already emailing a broker about a boat you have not touched. That instinct is right. Protect it. Do not let anyone rush you past it. Now I want to hear from you because this next part matters. Tell me in the comments the exact boat you are looking at right now. Give me the make, the model, and the year, and tell me where you are watching from. Because I read these and I will tell you straight, if it is one of the hulls, I would sound twice before I trusted it. If you are torn between 2 boats on your short list, name them both and let me weigh in. Do not lurk, type it out. The 5 minutes it takes you to comment might be the cheapest survey you ever get. And if you refuse to be the person who gets burned on a 6-figure boat because a listing told a pretty story, then come aboard and subscribe, because that is exactly who this channel is for. Buyers who knock on the hull and listen. Next time, I am pulling apart the one-engine survey number that tells you whether a diesel has 10 good years left or is about to cost you $20,000 and almost nobody checks it before they buy. You will want that number before you look at one more boat. I will see you there. I'm Marcus. If you stay with me inside the cruising compass, I'll walk you through that dock hull test step by step, right where we just left off. And when you're unsure about a boat, you can ask me directly, and I answer you myself, not a robot. You won't be doing this alone. So many sailboat buyers like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel any time. Now that you know which boats to avoid, there's one bigger choice ahead of you. Should you sail a catamaran or a monohull? I'll walk you through it honestly, plainly right here. Let's figure it out together.